we have for every one of you the answer.
The Duggar clan features 19 children. All of their names start with the letter J.
So if you don't know, the Duggar Shiny Happy People documentary is coming out June 2nd.
There was one man who stood up alone with an overhead projector and a Bible, and he said the problem is authority.
You would have to do like all of these outward things to be pleasing to God.
And while cameras have filmed the family for the last 10 years, viewers have really had the chance to see what it's like to be a Duggar only recently.
Yeah, no music with drums, modesty standards of wearing dresses only at all times, courtship instead of dating.
Really try to keep themselves pure.
The week that we filmed this was the week that Josh got sentenced.
Josh was made out to appear as the ideal older brother, always caring for his family and looking out for his sisters.
But in 2015, TLC canceled the show after reports surfaced that the oldest son, Josh, had allegedly 5 girls, including 4 of his sisters.
It was very restrictive.
They are rejecting authority, and if we can start teaching authority again, all will be well. And
Shiny Happy People is a 2023 docuseries on Amazon Prime that released on June 2nd of this year, just a couple weeks ago. It tells the dark story behind the Duggar family, who became most famous for their TLC show 19 Kids and Counting, along with the dad, Jim Bob Duggar, and his multiple attempts to hold office in Arkansas. The Duggars were made famous by TLC, which was previously known as The Learning Channel. Much like how MTV used to actually be about music, TLC wasn't always the way it was that we see it today. According to Business Insider, TLC actually first began in 1972 when the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare wanted to broadcast free informational, educational material via NASA satellite. In 1980, the channel first gained the name The Learning Channel after its acquisition by the Appalachian Community Service Network, and it soon began showing nature documentaries, shows about education and literacy, and science programs.
Science dance!
It wasn't until 1991, when Discovery bought TLC, that the channel began to show reality TV programs as well. However, throughout the 90s, TLC continued to show informational documentaries like the series Paleo World, which ran until 1997 and taught facts and history about dinosaurs, and a show like Amazing Space, which taught viewers about planets, stars, and more. It wasn't until 1998 that TLC started only using the name TLC, just the acronym, instead of the Learning Channel in its branding. Their previous educational shows were either distributed to other Discovery networks or they were canceled.
Cancel, we're canceling it.
Instead, the channel began to debut more and more reality TV shows like Trading Spaces, What Not to Wear, and Junkyard Wars. In 2008, TLC debuted 2 shows that focused on the trials and tribulations of raising extremely large families, John and Kate Plus 8, and the subject of today's video, 19 Kids and Counting, which at the time was called 17 Kids and Counting because then they had 2 more kids since the show began.
Spoiler alert.
From there, TLC's shows started to get...
Trash?
Well, for lack of a better word, trashier.
Trash!
And if I'm not lacking a better word, I would say they started to get more exploitative.
What is it with you and trash?
Exploitative of people living in poverty, of people dealing with various diseases, and especially exploitative of children. Shows like Hoarding, Buried Alive, and My Strange Addiction, and the bane of all of our existence, Toddlers and Tiaras, those shows began taking center stage. From 2008 until 2015, when some things happened that we'll get in today, 19 Kids and Counting was one of the most popular shows on TLC, and the Duggar family, a soft-spoken, well-mannered family of Christian fundamentalists, became one of America's most beloved TV families. While the family often appeared to be perfect on television, I mean, come on, a family with 19 children, but none of them are fighting over a Nintendo, none of them are calling each other offensive names.
You will not make this putt, you jackass!
None of them are disobeying their parents. There was actually a much darker force at play. That dark force is known as The IBLP, or the Institute in Basic Life Principles, a religious cult founded in 1961 by a truly insidious man named Bill Gothard. While on their own website, the IBLP claims that their original mission was helping teenagers and their parents make wise choices and sharing basic scriptural principles with inner city gangs in Chicago, church youth groups, high school Bible clubs, youth camps, and families in crisis. The IBLP was not at all your run-of-the-mill youth group organization. Instead, the IBLP had much more sinister plans, including repealing rights and freedoms for women, working toward the downfall of public school, and building an army of Christian fundamentalists to run for office in the US and, well, make America religious again.
Always look on the bright side of life.
And these plans all came from the mind of Bill Gothard, who, surprise, has countless allegations from women, including underage girls.
Our most solemn responsibility as individuals, as a state, and as a country is to protect our children.
What's wild is that it wasn't until my very late 20s that I even knew the IBLP existed, despite the fact that it's like right there next to me. IBLP was founded in Hinsdale, Illinois, Bill Gothard's hometown. Hinsdale is a suburb of Chicago, which is where I live in Chicago.
The Bears.
I pass through Hinsdale regularly when I go to my friends having book signings in Naperville. It's like, it's right there, you guys. But many Chicagoans and many Americans overall have been in the dark about IBLP for a while, which makes sense given the name of Chicago Magazine's 2016 article about them titled, "The Cult Next Door." As the article explains, virtually all of IBLP's teachings are viewed through the prism of male superiority and female obedience. In marriage, for example, the husband is the undisputed leader of the family, and his word is final. Elsewhere, women defer to men in almost every circumstance, on almost every level, including in the workplace. This belief system, the lawsuit says, considers women to primarily exist for the purposes of producing children, caring for the men, and rearing the children. Females in the patriarchal movement are discouraged from attaining higher education of any kind and are told that their sole purpose is to marry a man within the movement. Strict, sometimes draconian, moral codes find purchase in virtually all fundamentalist Christian groups. In the case of IBLP, however, some of the tenets seem downright bizarre. Cabbage Patch Kids are idolatrous. Syncopated music is the antithesis of what God desires in the life of a Christian. Blue jeans are ungodly. Circumcised men are morally purer than uncircumcised men. One IBLP article suggests that failing to render to the Lord can lead to miscarriage. Another, titled "How Are Eyelids Used for Seductive Purposes?" rails against the whoredom of the female wink. Such an act by an attractive but immoral woman can be used to communicate lustful desires and sensual entrapments. What's so shocking about all of this is that everything was right there in front of us. IBLP, the Duggar family, everything. Thousands of Americans watched the Duggars on television for years without knowing anything about the cult behind them or said cult's influence on American culture and government. And that's why I'm so glad that this new docuseries, Shiny Happy People, is out there in the world for us to see. The show exposed the dark tunnels connecting the abuse and exploitation of children, the dangers of the reality TV industry, and the strange ways that religious cults can expand beyond their initial circles of influence. This docuseries is filled with facts, sources, and, honestly, educational material. Ironically enough, Shiny Happy People might actually be something that the original TLC, the actual learning channel, would have been proud of.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy. Welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today we are going a little bit into the business and cult adjacent side of things, where we're going to talk about some of these life gurus that try to exploit people for their money. But before we get into this topic, please don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're new here, and don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every week I put out new videos about these types of topics. And while we're at it, I'd like to give a quick thank you to today's Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters are up on the screen, and y'all go ahead and take a look in the description below where I have linked my top tier Patreon supporters own small businesses, websites, whatever they want to support. Go ahead and check them out and give them some love. And If you like the shirt I'm wearing, guess what? It's my original art, and it's on my fashion and merch website, hipsterunicorn.myshopify.com, which is also linked in the description below. Actually, I don't think this shirt is released yet. I'm releasing it in early July. But other cool shirts like this are there, and this one's coming soon. So, good stuff there. Before we get too deep into the video, though, we will first have a quick thank you from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Magic Spoon, my go-to daily breakfast that has exactly what I'm looking for in a cereal. A good amount of protein and a whole lot of delicious flavor options. As I've mentioned before on this channel, I've been progressively adding more protein as I spend more time in the gym, but I also don't have time to cook 3 meals a day. Most days I barely have time to cook 1 meal. That's why I really like that I can rely on cereal, an easy to put together meal, just pour it in a bowl and add some milk to fulfill what I'm looking for in terms of protein content and just being a tasty meal that I look forward to eating. A 1 cup serving of Magic Spoon cereal has 13 to 14 grams of protein, 4 to 5 net grams of carbs, and about 140 calories. Plus, it's a cereal that fits in with a variety of different dietary needs. It's high protein, keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, wheat-free, and naturally flavored. Additionally, Magic Spoon offers cereal bars in flavors like cookies and cream and cocoa peanut butter, which contain 1 gram of sugar, 10 grams of protein, 4 net grams of carbs, and 130 calories per bar. These can be a really convenient snack on my walk to the gym or an easy thing to eat when I'm walking my dog in the morning. Recently, Magic Spoon also sent me 2 new flavors, chocolate chip cookie and oatmeal cookie, which I absolutely love. These flavors are going to be added to my list of favorite flavors, which already includes the fruity and cinnamon roll flavors. If you'd like to try Magic Spoon cereal for yourself, go ahead and click that link in my description below. You can build a variety box of flavors, which can include the flavors that I mentioned that I love, or other awesome flavors as well, like frosted peanut butter, maple waffle, honey nut, blueberry muffin, birthday cake, and more. Don't forget to use my code SAVVY to get $5 off of your order at checkout. Your order also comes with a 100% happiness guarantee, which means that if you don't like it for any reason, you can get your money refunded. So if you'd like to give this cereal a try, don't forget to click the link in my description or to head to magicspoon.com/savvy, where you can get $5 off of your order with my code SAVVY at checkout. Magic Spoon products ship throughout the US, the UK, and Canada. I hope that you enjoy your tasty new cereal as much as I have been. Now let's get back to our video topic. To start off, I want to say that I was very excited when I learned that this docuseries was going to come out, but I was also a little bit skeptical. The main reason for my skepticism was I just really hate this new streaming service trend of turning everything into a series. Like, what happened to just having a movie? What happened to a 2-hour documentary?
I told you not to ask me that!
Or if there's more information there than you can put in 2 hours, what happened to having like a 3-hour documentary? There are plenty of nerdy ass people in this world who would love to just watch a 3-hour documentary. Nerd! Overall, I've just had a lot of issues with streaming services wanting to make everything into a limited series where it's always intended to just be 1 season and 4 episodes when in reality it could just be 1 documentary. And the main reason I've struggled with this is I often feel like stretching everything out into a series tends to mess with the pace of the editing. I especially felt this way when I was watching the docuseries The Way Down about a year ago. The Way Down, in a similar vein to a series like Shiny Happy People, told the story of Gwen Shamblin, who ran a religious weight loss cult, and the ways that she used religious influence to indoctrinate people into starving themselves. It was wild, but it was also paced so slowly. Everything in the editing felt like it was emotionally manipulative, like the editors were just working extra hard to end each episode on a cliffhanger when I was watching, like, get to the point, fewer establishing shots please, stop setting the scene, just feed me information, mommy! I will say though that there's another 4-episode docuseries that I thought was edited really well on the other hand, and that was Lula Rich, the series exposing the cult behaviors going on behind the scenes at the LuLaRoe multi-level marketing company. At the same time, I wished that was also one cohesive movie, but I did think that the pacing was done very well within that series and that the episodes were well organized by theme. Shiny Happy People was a mix of both. I think the pacing was overall very good in this. It didn't feel like they were repeating information or that they were lingering too long on nature shots to drag out the runtime or anything like that. And similar to Lula Rich, Shiny Happy People did try to separate the episodes by theme, which was good, but I also thought that the thematic differences between these episodes weren't strong or contrasting enough to necessitate that. So that is to say, I do think that this would have functioned better as a 3-hour documentary rather than a series of 4 episodes that are roughly 45 minutes each. All I'm saying is bring back documentaries! stories, okay? It was clear that this was broken up into episodes because that's how people like to consume content right now, and that's fine. I think it is good to play to your audience, know your target customer, give them what they want.
We want to get loaded, yeah!
That's just good business. But I think the fact that people are out here enjoying 4-hour, 5-hour, even 6-hour long YouTube deep dives right now shows that long-form documentaries absolutely have a place in our world. So while I do wish that this had been one movie, I do think that the editing was well done and nothing felt dragged out or intentionally manipulative, and I really appreciated all of that. So with that little overview of my review of the series in mind, let's get into the episode-by-episode breakdown. This episode introduces us to the Duggar family, it gives us an overview of who they are, and it documents their rise to fame throughout the TLC show 17 Kids and Counting, which we know later became 19 Kids and Counting. We meet Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, who were married when Michelle was 17 years old. And then later we learn that Jim Bob ran for office in Arkansas as a Republican multiple times. I just think it's really funny how the party that claims that they're about protecting children and let kids be kids and they don't want grooming, they're also the ones that support it being legally allowed for you to marry underage girls. Jim Bob himself even married an underage girl. That's very cool. Now, I'm not calling Jim Bob himself a predator in that aspect because he was 19 when they were married, so in many ways he's just as much of a victim of that culture that encourages marriage at a young age, and 17 and 19 isn't really much of an age gap to worry about. That's like a high school sophomore and senior when they started dating, basically. That's fine, it's just weird that it's legal, right? Like, for people to get married at 17. Anyway, moving on. In this episode, we also meet Jim Bob's sister, Deanna, and her daughter Amy, who's known as the crazy cousin Amy, because while the Duggar family was all homeschooled, they couldn't watch TV, they couldn't listen to the radio, none of that. Crazy cousin Amy was out here doing wild things like going to school and listening to boy bands. What will the devil think of next? Then we learned that Jim Bob served as an Arkansas state representative in the past, and that he was friends with, at the time, Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, very cool guy, doesn't believe in evolution, also once called LGBTQ people a threat to the US's moral fiber. Very cool guy, very cool guy to be friends with.
Super cool.
The episode then details how Jim Bob's political career is what first led the family in their rise to fame. When the entire, at the time, 14-member Duggar family went to the polls together to encourage people to vote for Jim Bob in his Senate race, which he later lost, Parents Magazine ran the photo of the family together, which caught the attention of Discovery, the network that owned TLC. Discovery then ran a short documentary called 14 Kids and Pregnant Again, which later became the TLC show 17 Kids and Counting, which then became 18 Kids and Counting, which then became 19 Kids and Counting, which then became 18 Kids and 1 Convicted Felon. Then we get to my absolute favorite part of the episode, which is the introduction of Danielle Lindemann, a sociology professor with a special research focus on reality TV and its effects on culture and our socio-political landscape. I really appreciate that this episode went into the cultural significance of reality TV and some of the sociological reasons for its rise in popularity in recent decades. Danielle explains here that one reason Americans love reality TV so much is our deep connection to nostalgia as a concept. And that makes sense. Nostalgia is the basis for so much marketing right now, from Star Wars and Marvel reboots out the ass to my videos slipping in as many 90s Nickelodeon references as possible just to emotionally manipulate you, the audience, into liking me.
Hey, Maria! Come over here!
Hey, Bato, why don't you come over here?
Speaking of which, I'm nostalgic for the past when TLC used to be the Learning Channel. Anyway, in this section of episode 1, Danielle Lindemann talks about the appeal of reality TV. From the production side, it's extremely cheap and easy to produce, and because of that, it has a high profit margin, since there's also such high audience demand for it. And why is there such a high audience demand for it? Because of nostalgia. Lindemann also explains that shows like the Kardashians, even though they don't seem to have any connection to a simpler past, do regularly show upper-class women performing extreme femininity, which is often in line with our idealized version of the past. The Duggars create a similar vision by showing a family where the girls do the cooking, the boys engage in outdated courtship rituals, the family excludes new technology like TV and video games from their home, and everyone goes to church in heavy, very warm, very modest clothing. It looks like a picture of the past. It looks like an idyllic vision of the past that we may have seen in a 1950s advertisement, but not a version of the past that actually existed in any meaningful way for the majority of people. I found this discussion on nostalgia and its influence on reality TV to be one of the most interesting parts of this docuseries as a whole, and it led me to thinking more about this concept of nostalgia and how it can both help and harm us as humans. In her book, The Future of Nostalgia, Russian-American sociologist and professor Svetlana Boym distinguishes between two different types of nostalgia, the reflective and the restorative. Boym writes, "Instead of a magic cure for nostalgia, I will offer a tentative typology and distinguish between two main types of nostalgia, the restorative and the reflective. Restorative nostalgia stresses nostos, home, and attempts a transhistorical reconstruction of the lost home. Reflective nostalgia thrives in algos, the longing itself, and delays the homecoming, wistfully, ironically, desperately. Restorative nostalgia is at the core of recent national and religious revivals. It knows two main plots, the return to origins and the conspiracy. If restorative nostalgia ends up reconstructing emblems and rituals of home and homeland in an attempt to conquer and specialize time, reflective nostalgia cherishes shattered fragments of memory and demoralizes space. Restorative nostalgia takes itself dead seriously." Basically, restorative nostalgia is what happens when we try to bring back a past that never truly existed. Nostalgia as a term itself comes from the Greek roots nostos, to return home, and algos, for pain. Combined, nostalgia is the specific feeling we put to homesickness, but specifically to a home that we can't possibly return to, either because that home doesn't exist anymore, or because it never truly existed in the first place.
Too dark.
Restorative nostalgia, or the attempt to rebuild that home of the past, can be productive in some ways, like when a parent tries to introduce the child to the things that they loved when growing up so they can share in that joy together. But it can also take extremely destructive forms as well, like Make America Great Again!
Grab him by the pussy.
When people say Make America Great Again, what do they mean by again? What home of the past are they longing to return to? For many, this is a home that didn't actually exist. It's an idealized version of the past. It's like if we viewed the 1950s as if it actually looked like the movie Grease. Tell me more, tell me more. It's imagining that you'd be a homesteading tradwife with 5 loving children making delicious salted butter together and wearing fun vintage prairie dresses if you'd lived in the 1850s, when in reality, you'd have just died of cholera like the rest of us. And I'm actually planning to delve into this topic of restorative nostalgia a lot deeper in a future video I want to make about right-wing misinterpretations of American Girl dolls. But for now, let's just look at how this applies to TV in general and to the Duggar family specifically. Especially because, as this episode shows, it wasn't just reality TV and the Duggar family that rose to power fueled by a conservative sense of a misplaced restorative nostalgia. It was also the IBLP, and it was also Bill Gothard. As the episode explains, in the 1960s, the US was going through a period of change. More women were going to work, the civil rights movement was underway, and forced racial segregation was coming to an end. The Vietnam War was on the horizon, and so were anti-war protesters. For many people, especially straight white men, especially wealthy people, especially those who held positions of financial and social power at the time, this progress felt more like unrest than welcome change. And those people wanted something to return to a time when, to them, things felt simpler. Enter Bill Gothard! Much like many of the business gurus and MLM scammers we've covered on this channel, Bill Gothard was a grifter supreme! A man who sold self-help seminars, who promised he had the answers to improve your life, and his answer was the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or the IBLP. And the IBLP was a cult! It's always a cult. Whenever someone walks in saying, I've got the answers, 75% of the time, you can probably expect that their answer is going to be a cult. Probably more often than that, actually. And just like we discussed earlier, this is exactly the same tactic that Donald Trump used in the Make America Great Again movement, which is literally just a rephrasing of the definition of restorative nostalgia.
I moved on her like a bitch.
Back in 2021, I put out a video on this channel reviewing cult expert Stephen Hassan's book, The Cult of Trump, which explains how Trump used cult tactics in ways that directly parallel historically known cults like the Unification Church. And I talked about how this book had a very similar message, that Donald Trump much like all cult leaders, rose to power in a time of uncertainty. In this case, economic uncertainty specifically regarding manufacturing jobs leaving the US, technology taking the jobs of many blue-collar workers, and overall economic unrest, especially in the South and the Midwest. During times like these, people became vulnerable to powerful voices promising them that they can recreate that idyllic past for them. And often, the past that they're describing is one that took place before the recipient was even born. We're back. Meaning that the cult leader can manipulate them into seeing that message as the past looking however they want it to be. Of course the past looks just like Donald Trump or Bill Gothard or whoever else says it looks. They're old, they were there, I'm young and poor and I don't understand the world around me, but I've heard tales of the good old days, and if these guys say they have the answer. Now, of course, these issues are much more complex, and we can look at someone specifically like Bill Gothard as only pandering to white religious Americans, especially men and patriarchs.
Men in tights, tights, tights.
But these same tactics have been used in more progressive and left-leaning cults as well. As Amanda Montell's book Cultish outlines, Jim Jones originally wanted to create a land of economic and racial equality and often recruited his victims from activist groups trying to achieve greater income equality and racial equality within the US. But for the sake of giving this video a reasonable scope, we're going to focus more on conservative cults because that's what the IBLP was, and also those tend to play more on the concept of restorative nostalgia and how it plays into religion specifically. In the case of IBLP, the past that Bill Gothard's followers wanted to return to was a Christian one. One where Christianity, specifically Protestant Christianity, was the dominant social force within the US. And as the documentary points out, Bill Gothard had specific goals in mind to accomplish this. The episode then explains the Quiverful movement, which was a fringe Christian movement to abandon all forms of birth control and have as many children as God allowed. For some families, like the Duggars, this meant having 19 kids and counting. And as we'll see more as we get into the other 3 episodes of this, the Quiverful movement and the IBLP were also all part of a concerted effort to undermine public schooling because an uneducated population, one that has access to only one set of information, is an easily manipulated population. And this is where the Duggars come back in. In this episode, we also see the YouTuber Fundy Fridays, whose channel I absolutely love. She did an interview talking about Fundy influencers and the ways that fundamentalists, while often shunning the modern culture that comes from technology, are also apt to use social media and influencer culture to their advantage as a way to make Christian fundamentalism seem cool as they influence their followers. And as Fundy Fridays explains, families like the Duggars were part of an effort to become fundamentalist celebrities, to present this perfect image of what our lives could be if we just followed their specific version of Christianity, if we lived our lives according to their cult-specific religious principles. The Duggars are, in many ways, responsible for bringing the IBLP into the mainstream. But on the bright side, without them making this cult a household name, many of us wouldn't even have the awareness to watch out for them and know they're a cult in the first place. Toward the end of the first episode, we learn about one of Josh Duggar, the oldest in the family, one of his first adult jobs, which was to work with the Family Research Council, a conservative lobbying group. Because the IBLP had a goal to get influence within the US government, secure a strong Christian majority, and make the US into a fundamentalist Christian nation. The episode then ends with the beginning of Josh Duggar's downfall. On May 19th, 2015, as the episode explains, allegations came forward against Josh Duggar for having done physical and very non-consensual things to his much younger sisters. The episode also introduces us to Jim and Bobby Holt, who were family friends with the Duggars. Originally, their daughter had been dating Josh Duggar back in 2003 when Josh was 15. As the Holts explained, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar were aware of Josh's actions against his sisters, but they weren't planning to tell the Holts about it. Instead, they were planning to wait until Josh and Kaylee Holt were married and then let him confess. This was the end of the friendship between the Holt family and the Duggar family, as the Holts realized that the Duggars were the kind of people who would cover up this kind of thing and potentially put their own daughter in danger in the process, much like they'd done with ignoring the violence against their own daughters. As we've established many times, the Republicans are the party of protecting children. That's why Ron DeSantis has big signs that say, "Let kids be kids." That's why he's legislating against LGBTQ people being allowed to exist in public. And as we know, no one is a bigger defender of kids than Matt Walsh.
Our most solemn responsibility as individuals, as a state and as a country is to protect our children.
Matt Walsh, who released the book and documentary combo What is a Woman in an effort to protect kids against the LGBT agenda. Right? So of course, Matt Walsh, who has publicly hung out with Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar in the past, would denounce the Duggar family, especially as they were covering up the abuse of their own children. Right? You guys didn't think I was serious, did you? Of course, Matt Walsh defended Josh Duggar. In his May 2015 article, The Duggars Aren't Hypocrites, Progressives Are, Matt Walsh said the following: Josh Duggar has already lost his job, been publicly shamed, and had his name permanently sullied by these revelations. But critics are not satisfied. They want the show canceled and anyone who supports the family to give up and join the mob of stone throwers and witch burners. They say that Josh is not the only villain here. His parents are also guilty for not going to the police immediately. I know I'm opening myself up to serious criticism here, but let me be honest with you. If my own son, God forbid, came to me and admitted to doing what Josh Duggar did, I don't know that I'd immediately run to the cops. Would you? Is it really that simple? The decision to have your child arrested as a SA offender would be an automatic thing for you? Really? I guess I'm just a horrible person then. As a parent, you have to think whether your 14-year-old son deserves to have his life ruined over his mistakes. Maybe you'd decide that he does. I can't say I'd agree. I admire the family. They are living by their convictions in defiance of cultural trends and clearly bestowing a strong faith in all of their children. That faith hasn't, as we established, made any of them perfect saints, but it seems genuine. Thank you, Matt Walsh. We appreciate your input. Why does anyone listen to this man? Anyway, the first episode ends with Josh Duggar's allegations and subsequent legal trouble. This episode focuses a lot on the IBLP, Bill Gothard's influence, and the testimonies of various ex-IBLP members. In this episode, we're introduced to Bill Gothard's umbrella of protection, which is also called the umbrella of authority. This umbrella shows how we're all supposed to follow each other. Under the umbrellas, being protected the most are the children. Then the umbrella above the children, protecting them, is the mother. The umbrella above the mother is the father, or her husband, which means, of course, that women are supposed to be protected by their husbands, but they're also supposed to consider their husbands the authority. They have to submit to their husbands as much as their children have to submit to them. Got it. Then above the man of the house is the pastor of your church, and above the pastor is, of course, Bill Gothard, and above Bill Gothard is only God, because Bill talks to God directly. I guess Bill is second in command only to God. It's definitely not a cult. During this episode, we get a good sense of how Bill Gothard used information control within his movement as a way to manipulate his followers. As we've covered on this channel before, one method of analyzing a cult is through the BITE model, which was coined by Stephen Hassan, the aforementioned author of The Cult of Trump and a former member of the Unification Church. BITE is an acronym that stands for Behavioral Control, Information Control, Thought Control, and Emotional Control. While this definitely isn't the only method for analyzing whether or not something is a cult, and cults can still exist without having all these pieces in place, it's still a good starting point for figuring out whether an organization you're involved in is exhibiting too much control over your life. Information control is often a really huge one. We see this often in MLM companies when someone tries to recruit you into their downline and you say, well, hold on, before I agree to anything, let me look up the company first. And they go, no, you don't need to do your own research. I can send you all the information you need. That's because the company, which often functions like a commercial cult, wants to be in charge of what information about them you are able to consume. This is a way to keep people in the dark about all negative sides of your organization. And Bill Gothard absolutely used information control when trying to recruit and keep people as part of the IBLP. For example, IBLP did not allow its members to watch TV shows, but they were allowed to have a TV set with a VCR hooked up to it because they could use the VCR to watch Bill Gothard's videos on VHS. But they couldn't have cable because Bill's word, which he was claiming was God's word, was the only word they needed to have. One of the biggest revelations of this episode is related to this idea of information control, and that is an issue that we're seeing getting worse and worse within the US today, the Republican effort to undermine the public school system. The IBLP included its own homeschooling system. During this episode, multiple ex-IBLP members shared their stories of participating in Bill Gothard's homeschooling system and the education that they got from the Bible good, secular world bad curriculum that he prepared for them. This was called ATI, and it stood for Advanced Training Institute. Bill Gothard believed that public school would brainwash our kids. And who do we see saying that often right now? Well, Matt Walsh, who defended Josh Duggar, loves to talk about how LGBTQ teachers are going to indoctrinate and brainwash our kids. Ron DeSantis says the same. Remember a couple months ago when I reviewed the book Stolen Youth, written by Bethany Mandel, the biggest Karen on Twitter, the woman who went viral because she kept talking about the word woke agenda but couldn't think of how to define woke? Yeah, that book. In that book review, I explained that I was worried that her book was part of an overall right-wing push to end public school. Because, remember, the free market pro-capitalist side of the right wing prefers that schools, like prisons, be privatized because everything is about profit, the government shouldn't run anything, everything should be privatized. Meanwhile, the evangelical and fundamentalist sides of the right wing want to destroy public school because public school teaches secular worldviews and isn't allowed to teach only Christianity. When these two groups within the conservative movement come together, they have one goal: defund public schools, privatize education, and homeschool as many kids as possible. And this isn't just a conspiracy theory. It's a plan that was laid out within IBLP training. When we get into episode 4, we'll also talk about Generation Joshua, which was a similar organization with even more direct goals to create a Christian-only government takeover and end public schooling. But for now, let's focus on the IBLP. Bill Gothard claimed that his ATI homeschooling program was equivalent to getting a high school diploma, a pre-med degree, and a pre-law degree all in one. And he's modest, too. As the docuseries showed, the educational materials included in this program were explicitly anti-evolution. It didn't teach math beyond fractions, especially to girls, because girls only needed to know fractions for baking and had no use for advanced math. Now remember, it was far-right Florida governor, a Christian man himself, Ron DeSantis, who said,
"Our school system is for educating kids, not indoctrinating kids."
I'm sorry, is refusing to teach math in favor of teaching creationism not a form of indoctrination itself? And to claim that this is enough of an education to keep a kid out of public school? What is going on here? In one of the most disturbing parts of the documentary, we saw an example of one of the worksheets that was given to young girls. These girls would look at pictures of women wearing various types of outfits, and for their assignment, they had to identify the eye traps on the outfits. By eye traps, they mean, what makes this woman look like she's asking for it? Literally, they'd give girls a worksheet with a picture of a woman on it and ask which parts of this outfit are going to be tempting to men. Like, we don't need math, but we do need whatever that is. This episode also talked about how one educational research that Bill Gothard loved was the book To Train Up a Child, written by Michael and Debbie Pearl. That book was basically about how you would train your child as if you're training an animal. And honestly, though, the techniques used in this book, I would never even consider using when training an animal in the first place, because these techniques are completely cruel.
If a parent doesn't want to beat their child, it means that they hate their child. And the reason for this? Some Bible quote.
A couple years ago, Rachel Oates did a full review of this book on YouTube, which earned her more than 1 million well-deserved views. Here are some highlights from that book.
They would hit her bare legs with a 12-inch long switch, 1/8 of an inch in diameter, made from a willow tree. They ruin it all again with chapter 5, which is simply titled, The Rod. I observed a child possessed of continual discontent. His mother was vainly trying to elicit obedience to a simple command. He was miserable, constantly complaining, whining, and angry. The mother, made miserable by the little tyrant's rebellious antics, was ill-tempered towards him, but she continued to plead with him as if she were trying to remember what she heard about positive affirmation and not stifling his personal expression. As an objective observer, concerned for the child's happiness and well-being, I said to the mother, "Why don't you give him a spanking and make him happy?" The shocked mother replied, "Oh, he'll grow out of it. It's just a stage he's going through."
Shortly after, the episode ties in how all of these teachings from the IBLP helped Josh Duggar after the allegations about him surfaced. For example, a slew of ex-IBLP members talked about the ways that purity culture was enforced within the IBLP.
Really try to keep themselves pure.
Including talks about how women were supposed to always be available for their husbands, and how the act of giving your daughter away at a wedding wasn't just like a traditional piece of the church processional, it was supposed to literally represent the transfer of authority from a woman's father to her husband. Women were treated basically as property. And so, when these allegations against Josh came out, 2 of the girls in the family who were victimized by him were pressured by their family into going on the Megyn Kelly show for an interview. In this episode, Jill Duggar, now a 30-year-old adult, recounts the Megyn Kelly interview and talks about how she felt pressured at the time into protecting Josh during it. The episode includes clips from the interview where Jill tries to downplay what her brother did to her and calls for people not to mischaracterize him as a violent monster. But now, in Jill's current-day interview for Shiny Happy People, she has a different story, one where she regrets covering for her older brother in this way. To tie everything together, the indoctrination, the government involvement, all of it, the episode explains to us how Mike Huckabee, the governor of Arkansas, helped Josh Duggar at the time by using his PR connections to help cover up this scandal.
Our most solemn responsibility as individuals, as a state, and as a country is to protect our children.
Episode 3 is called Under Authority, and it focuses on the ways that the IBLP specifically use the authority over children as a way to indoctrinate them and force them into labor.
Our school system is for educating kids, not indoctrinating kids.
For example, it talks about IBLP training centers, which were places where kids and teenagers would work, sometimes for up to 16 hours a day, sometimes doing manual labor, and other times doing like administrative work for Gothard at IBLP headquarters. Gothard would often encourage kids to go into these training centers rather than going to college because college would brainwash them. One of the programs mentioned was Alert, which was a military school-style program run by Gothard for young boys. This episode reveals that, much like Jim Bob Duggar, Bill Gothard was also friends with Mike Huckabee and was additionally friends with Sarah Palin. We love it when people in the top levels of government are involved with cult leaders. What could go wrong? And guess who else was friends with Bill Gothard? David Green! Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you should recognize the name David Green because he was the subject of one of my deep Daves back in 2021, one of our 12 Daves of Christmas. David Green is the founder of Hobby Lobby, the man who first got in trouble for wanting to deny his employees health insurance that included birth control and then later got in trouble for keeping his stores open during the first wave of COVID lockdowns and claiming that God would take care of it. That's David Green! And guess what? He's one of the IBLP's biggest donors. So, if you needed another reason not to shop at Hobby Lobby outside of the overused shiplap style live, laugh, love signs around every corner, here's another one. The more David Green profits, the more he can donate to the IBLP. We love to see it. Isn't capitalism great, friends? We love to have to think long and hard about where we buy our Crayola markers and our bedazzling kits and our paint by number sets because we could be unintentionally helping someone fund a cult. I love it. And much like the leader of a pyramid scheme or the leader of a multi-level marketing company or any cult leader, Bill Gothard was siphoning every bit of money he could out of his followers. As ex-IBLP members in this documentary point out, Bill Gothard's seminars and his homeschooling programs were not cheap. He charged out the ass for them. Meanwhile, he was keeping the profit for himself off living an extravagant life. It reminded me a lot of another 4-part docuseries I mentioned earlier, LuLaRich, where we learned how Mark and Deanne Stidham, founders of LuLaRoe, were spending their money collecting various classic cars, going on extravagant vacations, getting weight loss surgeries, and living in luxurious mansions, all while pressuring their distributors to pay more into the company, to fundraise to meet quotas, to spend their last dollars investing in LuLaRoe as a career. They all use the same playbook, but when people are in need of hope, in need of community, in need of a solution to the endless array of life's problems, this playbook works. Paralleling Bill Gothard's exploitation of his own followers, this episode took us into some of the ways that Jim Bob Duggar exploited and manipulated his own children. On this channel, I've talked a lot about the ways that social media influencer culture and reality TV culture as well have led to new ways for adults to exploit their children for profit. While child labor has long been an issue, over time we usually get laws and regulations put into place to protect kids from being forced to work. However, reality TV and influencer kids are the classes that are often left out of these protections. During interviews with Jill Duggar, Shiny Happy People uncovers some of the ways that Jim Bob avoided paying his kids, tricked them into signing contracts, and hoarded all of the money that he made on the show for himself. At one point, Jill talks about how Jim Bob, after much pressure, agreed to pay the older kids in the family a lump sum for the work that they'd done in the past on the TLC show. However, once the kids did the math, they realized that the amount he paid them was equivalent to what minimum wage would have been the year they turned 18. So basically, he just did the bare minimum. Now, my first thought in all of this was, why was Jim Bob legally allowed to keep all of the show's money for himself? The kids, through no consent of their own, worked on their show. They brought in the money. The show wasn't called Jim Bob and Counting, it was called 19 Kids and Counting. Without the 19 kids, Jim Bob would have made nothing. We've covered a few cases of child exploitation in media on this channel before. In two of my past videos, my video reviewing Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, and my deep dive on the Fathering Autism channel, I talked about the Coogan Law, a law named after Jackie Coogan, former childhood silent film star who grew up to play Uncle Fester on the Addams Family. When Coogan was 21, he went to cash out the money he made as a child actor in silent films, only to find that his parents had spent the money. After a lawsuit, it was determined that all child actors would be protected under the Coogan Law with a Coogan account, which guarantees that at least 15% of their income will be put into an account that the parents cannot access. This law has protected a lot of child actors from financial abuse. And while I still think we need way more laws in Hollywood to protect kids from abuse, at the very least we have this law. Unfortunately, there is no such protection for reality TV or internet influencer children. In a 2022 Psychology Today article, sociologist Hilary Levy-Friedman explains, since the first reality series An American Family hit our screens in 1971, children have become regulars of reality TV. But these kids have not yet been granted the same protection of recognized performers like Coogan. One reason for this anomaly is due to a contractual nuance, as the children themselves are often without a contract separate from their parents. The child, in effect, becomes a bonus character by proxy of the parent, and thus, the child is not afforded full legal protection like other working minors. Under existing state laws, a child on reality TV does not qualify under child labor or performer laws. When you consider that children who appear on reality television shows deserve at least as much protection as other child performers, it is not difficult to go even further and argue that they deserve more protection because it is their own identities and their own lives being put on public display. So yeah, because the Duggars were on reality TV, the children weren't really considered actors. They weren't really considered employed, but rather they were an extension of their parents' employment, which means that, yes, all the money went to Jim Bob. Like I've been saying for a long time, we need protections for kids who are reality TV stars and social media stars. The child acting industry is already rife with corruption and abuse, but at the very least, those kids are acting. These kids have their real private lives on display with their real name attached to it. They have no separation of their real life identity from their public TV or internet identities. While episode 3 largely covered the exploitation, both financial and emotional, of children under the IBLP, episode 4 focused on the efforts to fight back against Bill Gothard and against IBLP. Episode 4 opens with the arrest of Josh Duggar. See, while Josh Duggar had already gotten in just a little bit of trouble for what he did to his sisters, his family was mostly able to wave that away by sending him to one of those troubled teen camps, which was, of course, run by Bill Gothard and the IBLP. However, in 2021, Josh Duggar was caught downloading and storing a certain type of material on his computer. Involves non-consensual things being done to children. As the episode explains, Josh, like all the Duggars, had a software installed on his computer called Covenant Eye, which is a religious-based software that blocks you from being able to visit explicit websites at all. However, because Josh was known within his family for being good with computers, unbeknownst to everyone else, he'd split the hard drive, and it was on his alternate partitioned hard drive, the one that didn't have the Covenant Eye software installed, where he was accessing the material that involved children. Then, the episode explains how, right in the midst of Josh's arrest for this material, Jim Bob decided that it was once again time to run for Senate. Jim Bob, of course, lost the race. And who do we think that Jim Bob chose to blame when he lost? Whom did Jim Bob blame for the bad press he got in 2021 during his campaign? Was it A, your mom, B, his own son who had just been arrested for endangering children, or C, the woke leftist agenda? It's C. It's always C. In November 2021, The Hill released an article titled, Duggar Patriarch Slams Woke Left Cancel Culture on Campaign Website. Reality star and former politician Jim Bob Duggar is slamming cancel culture on his campaign website for the Arkansas Senate in the wake of child endangerment material charges being brought against his son. The 19 Kids and Counting star, who previously served in the Arkansas House, last month announced his candidacy to fill the Senate spot currently held by longtime state Republican Senator Lance Eads, who is resigning. On a page titled "Why I'm Running," Duggar defends his family as it deals with backlash over the arrest of his son, Josh Duggar. The 33-year-old pleaded not guilty to federal charges in April. "I will not allow the liberal left, social media, or fake news to define me and my family," Jim Bob Duggar wrote. He added, "Cancel culture and the radical left want to keep us from being involved in politics." I'm sorry, Jim Bob. Did the radical left make your son do things to children? Was it cancel culture's fault that Josh Duggar is It's this discussion over Jim Bob's failed Senate campaign that leads Shiny Happy People into a new discussion. The IBLP, a similar group called Generation Joshua, and these groups concerted movements to groom children to grow up to become right-wing politicians. I'm not kidding. Generation Joshua is responsible for politicians like Madison Cawthorn, one of the youngest Congress members who eventually also faced multiple allegations of SA and harassment from a whole slew of women. In this episode, we meet a lawyer named Alex Harris who used to belong to Generation Joshua but eventually left it behind. He spoke about his time within the group and claimed that Generation Joshua's entire mission was to create a generation of homeschooled Christian kids who would grow up and join the government. He started talking about a program called Teen Pact, which was this organization's high school program to start preparing kids for their futures in government. What happened to let kids be kids? I'm sorry, is this not grooming? According to the Generation Joshua website, the vision of Generation Joshua is to assist parents to raise up the next generation of Christian leaders and citizens, equipped to positively influence the political processes of today and tomorrow. Generation Joshua upholds and calls on each of its members to champion biblical values, especially the sanctity of life, personal responsibility, the traditional family, limited government, religious freedom, economic freedom, justice for all, compassion for the poor and vulnerable. So some of these things don't really go together, do they? Like, we know that traditional family is just a dog whistle for no gays or marriages between one man and one woman. So how can you support both that and limited government? Can the government dictate who you can marry or can they not? Also, we know that economic freedom is code for free market capitalism or Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, whatever you want to call it. So how can you support that and compassion for the poor and vulnerable when a completely hands-off, unregulated free market leads to things like price gouging insulin and completely privatizing healthcare? But regardless of whether or not it actually makes sense, it's an organization that exists. And these programs, Generation Joshua, Teen Pact, all of these programs specifically created to turn kids into future conservative political leaders, they were all supported by, drumroll please, Bill Gothard! And it's working too. The Duggar family has overall shown a strange level of interest in politics, from Jim Bob's time as a representative and then failed Senate runs, to Josh's working on Mike Huckabee's campaign, to Jed Duggar's 2020 run for Arkansas representative. Jed Duggar, younger brother of Josh Duggar and one of the 19 kids and counting, ran in 2020 for Arkansas representative when he was 21 years old. As the U.S. Sun reported in November 2020, Jed Duggar has lost his bid to become state representative for Arkansas to Megan Godfrey. The 21-year-old Counting OnStar's campaign was rife with controversy as he was accused of name-calling and accepting illegal donations. The reality star announced he was running for state representative in November 2019. Since then, Jed's campaign has been riddled with scandal. The TLC star faced backlash for accepting $8,400 from a single donor in Louisiana, which is triple the legal amount in Arkansas. The maximum a single donor can donate in Arkansas is $2,400. The TV star, who announced his pro-life, pro-gun campaign last November, has received donations from several family members. His brothers John, Joseph, James, and Jason, and Jessa's husband Ben Seawald, and Joy's husband Austin Forsyth have donated $500 each. The reality star was also slammed for name-calling after he branded rival Megan a liberal princess. The series then ends with a bit of hope, as it shows all of the ex-IBLP members we've seen throughout the series discussing their deconstruction and their life after the cult. We also learn that Gothard's program for homeschooling, ATI, no longer exists as a valid school curriculum and instead is sold online as Bible study materials. I mean, at least it's not considered a substitute for real school anymore. We also learn that Josh Duggar was sentenced to 12 years in prison after being found guilty of possessing explicit material involving children. And then Jill Duggar and crazy cousin Amy both talk about how they feel like they're living life on the outside of their family now. Jim Bob and Michelle won't talk to them anymore. They feel like they've been ostracized. Similarly, we learn about Ginger Duggar's recent book, Becoming Free Indeed, in which she discusses reclaiming her own spiritual and religious beliefs outside of the IBLP, outside of the exploitation of reality television. But Ginger, Jill, Amy, and the others who have spoken out are placed on the outside now, excommunicated from their own family. And this is a common tactic that we see in cults. If someone wants to leave, isolate them. Make it so they have no friends or family anymore. How many times have we heard this story with MLMs? How many times have we heard an ex-Beachbody rep or a former LuLaRoe seller talk about how the brilliant bonds of sisterhood she'd experienced in the company were completely shattered after choosing to leave? This is the emotional control piece of the bite model. If you don't want to be part of our cult, you're not even part of our family anymore. So while the series does end with a bit of hope, showing us how some people have successfully deconstructed from the IBLP, it doesn't sugarcoat the realities of the harms that this group has caused. I honestly think that Shiny Happy People is a series that everyone needs to watch. Regardless of your religious background, your political leanings, or whether or not you like watching TLC, the show exposes a lot of really, really shady things going on behind the scenes. And I think that there are some important takeaways that we can leave this show with. First, the IBLP is a cult. It is not a valid sect of Christianity. It is not a valid religion. It is a straight-up cult. I'm saying it. Second, public school is important. Whether you as a parent choose to send your kids to public school, to private school, or to homeschool them, it's important that we all understand the necessity of a well-educated population. And even if you don't personally utilize public schools as a resource, it is a resource that needs to exist. I really appreciate how this documentary showed us right there on screen that groups like IBLP and Generation Joshua are actually trying to indoctrinate kids rather than educate them, and that they are literally out here spreading the messages that public school will brainwash you. Meanwhile, they're the ones doing the brainwashing. It's so important right now that we stand up for public school teachers and support public education, because there really are people out here who are making a concerted effort to destroy it. Finally, I think this documentary is a great case study in the dangers of romanticizing the past. A smiley, shiny, happy family on TV isn't actually perfect because they lead a simpler, more God-fearing life. They appear perfect because they're required to. The world has always sucked. It will always suck too, but we can at least hope that it will suck less the more we work on making it a better place for each other. That is to say, in life we'll experience various ups and downs as we go along, and that's the way it's always been since the beginning of humanity. There is no making America great again because there is no idealistic past for us to return to. Restorative nostalgia is often a dangerous force that tricks people into believing that the world used to be perfect, that the past can be looked at with rose-colored glasses. But there really isn't such a past in existence. There's only the shiny, happy veneer that we painted with. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. Have you watched the docuseries? What are your thoughts on it? Tell me everything. Otherwise, I will see you guys again next week for more videos. But in the meantime, keep on supporting small businesses and have a fantastic start to your day. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.